Imagine waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a doll, one you swore you had left somewhere else, staring at you with its eyes. Something much darker was hiding behind that innocent toy. A true story of curse and vengeance that defies any logical explanation. Have you ever felt watched while you sleep? What if that feeling wasn't just your imagination, but something far more real? Something that won't go away. Get ready to uncover what's behind an haunted doll. Watch until the end, without blinking, because what you'll see might change everything you believe about the supernatural. Are you really safe in your home? Or perhaps there's something, or someone, watching you right now. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel because you won't want to miss the next story, or what happens after this one.
It was a cold October night when I received a call that, unknowingly, would change my perception of the supernatural forever. The voice on the other end of the line was fragile and nervous, barely audible through sighs and heavy breathing. It seemed as though she was running, desperately trying to escape something. When she finally managed to speak, the fear in her words was palpable, as if the mere act of telling what was happening was paralyzing her. She told me with difficulty that there was something in her house, something she couldn't control. I was filled with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, wondering if it was just a prank or a delusion caused by stress. The woman spoke of a doll, but not just any doll. She described in detail every feature of its appearance: large, fixed eyes with a strange, almost human glow, and a sinister smile that seemed to stretch in an unnatural way. She claimed that at night, the doll didn't stay in the same place. It came to life, moved on its own, watching and even, according to her, talking to the residents of the house in a way that couldn't be explained. At first, I dismissed it as a superstition, a made-up story to grab attention, but the woman's tone of terror was enough to make me stop and reconsider. It was as if she were in a state of total despair, something that couldn't simply be ignored. She told me that the doll wasn't just a physical presence, but an entity that seemed to have its own will, a supernatural force that defied all rational explanations. The nights were becoming unbearable, and she feared she couldn't endure the feeling of being watched every second. As the woman spoke, a strange sensation began to take over me. The skepticism that had previously dominated my mind was slowly replaced by a growing unease. Suddenly, the line went silent, and the only sound that could be heard was her tense breathing, as if something was drawing near. Before I could ask more, the call was abruptly cut off. I tried to call back, but the number was no longer available. I stood in silence with the feeling that something beyond reason was at play. As the minutes dragged on, a strange but inescapable thought began to form in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in that tale that couldn't be explained. Something lurking in the shadows of reality, waiting to be discovered. And I, unknowingly, had just become involved in a story that, from that cold October night onward, would change my life forever. Helena had always been drawn to old objects, to those relics that told stories without words. It was at a flea market on a rainy autumn morning that she found the doll. With its faded silk hair, lace dress yellowed by time, and glassy black eyes that seemed to absorb the light around it, she felt irresistibly drawn to its antique appearance and enigmatic smile. At that moment, Helena had no idea that the doll would become the beginning of an experience that would challenge her understanding of reality. At first, the doll seemed harmless, a simple decorative item for her shelf, which she admired with a mix of fascination and curiosity. Helena's house was simple and cozy, and she thought the doll, with its silent presence, would add a touch of mystery and charm. However, she soon began to notice that something was wrong. Sometimes Helena would wake up in the middle of the night, her sleep interrupted by an uncomfortable feeling, as if she were being watched. When she turned in bed, her gaze inevitably drifted to the shelf, where the doll was. What had once seemed like a stationary statue now appeared to have a life of its own. Its fixed glass eyes, always facing the person who observed it, now seemed more alive, as if they were attentive to everything around them. The smile, once subtle, now appeared wider, more unsettling. And then the movement began. One morning, Helena found the doll in a completely different position from the night before. At first, she thought she might have forgotten where she had placed it. But when it happened again more than once in different spots around the room, she no longer had any doubts that something strange was going on. She wondered, could the doll be moving on its own, or was her mind starting to play tricks on her? Perhaps it was the lighting in the house, shadows playing with her senses. But there was something in its eyes, something that seemed to defy logic, as if it was waiting for something. At first, she tried to ignore the subtle changes. After all, there was nothing concrete, just disconcerting sensations. But as the days passed, the situation became harder to ignore. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night and find the doll in different positions, farther away or closer to her, as if it were approaching, watching more closely. The doll's movement, though small, began to become more noticeable and unsettling. And then, on the night the wind blew fiercely and the windows rattled, the worst happened. When Helena went down to the kitchen, a cold sensation swept over her skin. She looked at the shelf and saw, for the first time, the doll out of its usual place. It was standing, upright, its glass eyes fixed in Helena's direction as if it were waiting for her. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy, thick, as if the air was saturated with an invisible presence. Helena tried to push away the growing fear that gripped her chest, but when she took a step toward the doll, the light bulb flickered. The air grew more oppressive, and with the sound of a faint snap, the doll, as if it had a life of its own, slowly turned its head, staring at Helena with an almost mocking expression. It was at that moment that Helena knew the worst was yet to come. She no longer had any doubt that the doll was not just an old object. It was something more, an unsettling presence that was in her house, watching, waiting. Something was preparing to reveal itself, and the peace she had once known in her home had been shattered forever. During a night of insomnia, Helena woke up from a muffled nightmare, her heart pounding in her chest. The nightmare had been like a massive shadow, crawling and twisting in her mind, faceless, formless, but with the feeling of an oppressive presence that was chasing her. She struggled to catch her breath, trying to push away the weight of the anguish that still surrounded her, when her eyes, still somewhat blurry, fixed on something that made her freeze. The doll was there, at the foot of her bed. It wasn't lying on the floor, as it had so many times before, when fatigue or distraction made her leave it forgotten in some corner of the house. No, it was sitting upright, watching Helena with its deep black glass eyes. The grotesque smile, which had once seemed harmless, now appeared in a way that was even more disturbing, as if it were mocking her. Helena couldn't move. Her muscles were paralyzed, her mind stunned, trying to process what she was seeing. The doll's eyes, once fixed and expressionless, now seemed alive, malicious, as if they carried an ancient and sinister secret that should not be uncovered. The smile, once just an unsettling detail, now seemed to stretch grotesquely, and Helena felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but her throat was tight, as if something invisible had squeezed her neck. The air was dense, heavy, saturated with a discomfort that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. Each second that passed felt like an eternity, as if time had been stretched, and the house had plunged into a deadly silence, where even the faintest sound seemed impossible. Helena knew something was wrong, but reality seemed to distort before her eyes. She was being watched, surveilled by something that shouldn't be there, something the house had kept hidden for so long. Fear paralyzed her, and the only thing she could do was stare, helpless, at the doll's eyes, which now seemed to consume her soul, slowly, without hurry. It was as if the very air was becoming denser, more oppressive. Something that didn't belong to the real world was there, in that room, watching her, waiting for something. And in that split second, Helena had the sense that she was no longer alone. That the doll was not just an object, but something much more dangerous, an entity that had found in her a victim, a prey. Whatever was there, hidden behind the doll's fixed eyes, was just beginning to show its true face. Helena couldn't take it anymore. After that night, when she woke up to find the doll watching her with its lifelike eyes and grotesque smile, she knew she had to get rid of that curse. Desperate, she threw the doll in the trash, believing that would be the end. At least she hoped it would be. The feeling of relief was temporary, but she knew it was necessary. She could no longer live with that presence in her house. But the next day, when she returned from work, the air in the house felt different. The door creaked open with a sound that seemed like a warning. Helena hesitated for a moment in the hallway, a chill crawling up her spine. The silence seemed even denser than before, as if the house were waiting for her reaction. When she entered the living room, her eyes were immediately drawn to the sofa. There it was, the doll, sitting as always with that smile intact, as if nothing had happened. Helena's heart sank, and despair took over her chest. How could the doll have returned? She had thrown it away. She had rid herself of it. She had done everything she could to push it out of her life. But there it was once again, watching, as if it had become part of the house, part of her very reality. The feeling of being watched returned, now more intense than ever. The house, which had once been a refuge, now felt suffocated, swallowed by an invisible and terrifying presence. The air was heavier, thick with something that couldn't be explained, a constant pressure that seemed to come from all sides. The fear, immense and palpable, seemed to be in every corner, every nook of the house. That night, terror took hold of Helena in a way she never imagined possible. The footsteps she heard in the hallway were not just ordinary sounds. They were heavy, slow steps, as if someone, or something, was moving through the shadows, watching every movement she made. She got out of bed, but when she tried to open the door, the sound of a muffled giggle came from the far end of the hallway. A low, sinister laugh, as if the doll were enjoying her agony. The smell, initially subtle, began to intensify. A strange, nauseating odor mixed with something metallic, as if the very environment was starting to rot. Sometimes the smell would disappear for a moment, but it would soon return stronger, like a presence that couldn't be ignored. Helena tried to fight off the panic, but it was as if the house had become a battlefield. Every shadow seemed to hide something, every noise seemed like a threat. Fear paralyzed her, and the doll, with its unchanging smile, was the center of it all. She knew something was approaching, something she couldn't escape, something that had already taken over her life, her mind, her home. The doll was no longer just an object. It was the key to an endless nightmare, and Helena was trapped in it, not knowing how or where she could find an escape. Each day seemed more unbearable than the last, and she no longer knew how much longer she could withstand the pressure of what was happening. The terror was real, the house was alive, and with it, the doll watched, smiling, waiting for the next move of its victim. It was when the situation reached its breaking point that Helena, in a final desperate effort, sought help. Her eyes, already exhausted from crying so much and losing herself in anxiety, searched for a solution that went beyond what she could control. She knew something was terribly wrong, something that surpassed the limits of reason. A medium was called to her house, someone recommended by a friend who swore to have witnessed the true power of the man. The medium arrived with a serious but skeptical demeanor. He seemed to not believe the stories Helena told about the doll, thinking it was nothing more than a psychological disturbance or a common superstition. However, as soon as he entered the house and began to feel the atmosphere, something changed. The air was heavy, saturated with a presence that wasn't physical, but seemed to permeate every inch of the house. When he entered the living room and his eyes locked on the doll, the expression that had once been filled with doubt quickly transformed into something darker, as if a truth he didn't want to face had finally been revealed. He took a step toward the doll, his eyes fixed on the terrifying figure with its malevolent smile. Then, in a whisper so faint it was almost inaudible, he said, "She's not alone." The tone of his voice made Helena's heart race. A shiver ran down her spine, as if those words had unleashed something she wasn't prepared to see. The medium, once sure and rational, was now visibly disturbed. He seemed to recognize something that shouldn't be there, something that hid in the shadows, something behind the doll. Without wasting any time, he positioned himself in the center of the room, closed his eyes, and began to murmur words in a strange language. The atmosphere in the house became even heavier, as if the air was filled with invisible electricity. Helena, frozen in place, watched with wide eyes, feeling an increasing panic take hold of her body. The medium seemed to fall into a trance, his movements slow, as if he were trying to connect with something ancient and evil, something that was trapped there, waiting to be freed. His voice, though low, seemed to echo throughout the house, reverberating off the walls. The words he spoke sounded like a chant, an invocation that Helena didn't understand, but that made her stomach churn and her terror grow. It was as if he were trying to negotiate, to bargain with something that inhabited the space between the world of the living and the dead, something that might have been there long before she brought the doll into her home. With every word spoken, the atmosphere seemed to respond. The air grew denser, more suffocating. The house, once a welcoming home, now felt like a prison, surrounded by forces that couldn't be controlled. Helena felt a strong pressure on her head, as if something were trying to penetrate her thoughts, to dominate her mind. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but her legs were immobile, as if the house itself were holding her in place. The medium, now completely immersed in the trance, continued to murmur, his eyes watering, his body tense. The doll, unchanged, appeared more threatening than ever. It was there, sitting with its macabre smile, as if it knew something Helena still didn't understand. Something she couldn't see, but that was getting closer and closer. And as the medium invoked ancient forces, something in the air seemed to shift. The house, already consumed by fear, now seemed alive, breathing with the presence of something that didn't belong to this world. "She's not alone," the medium repeated in a hoarse whisper. Helena didn't know if he was referring to the doll or something much worse, but at that moment, she understood. What was happening in her house wasn't just a simple case of madness or superstition. It was something deep, something primordial, something far beyond what she could control. And then it happened. What Helena had feared, what she had feared for days, finally materialized before her eyes. The doll, until then motionless, moved. It wasn't a simple slip of fabric or a shake of the arm, as she had often imagined might be explained. No, the movement was precise, rigid, as if it were being controlled by some invisible, relentless force. It rose on its own, its movements mechanical and unsettling, as if it had no life, but rather a purpose. Helena stood frozen, unsure if what she was seeing was real or an illusion of her terrified mind. And then, with a deafening crash, the doll fell to the floor, the sound reverberating off the walls of the room. The impact made the air around vibrate, and Helena's heart raced. She didn't know what to do, how to react to that grotesque sight. The doll was on the floor, but it was no longer inert. The smile, which had always been a disturbing feature, now seemed to stretch even wider, as if mocking the medium's efforts, everything he was trying to do to contain it. It seemed to be enjoying itself, as if it knew nothing could stop it. Helena screamed, her voice coming out in a muffled, desperate cry, but the voice was swallowed by the emptiness, as if the house itself devoured it, as if reality had distorted and words no longer had power. She wanted to run, wanted to escape, but her body was frozen, rooted to the ground as if some invisible force had taken hold of her mind, preventing her from acting. Panic seized her soul, every hair on her body standing on end from the tension. Fear was no longer just a sensation, but a tangible presence, something that was in every corner of the house. The medium, in a trance, couldn't react in time. His eyes were fixed, stunned, as if he had finally understood that what he was facing was something he couldn't control, something much older and more powerful than he had ever imagined. He tried, but the words he whispered made no difference. The doll, with its wicked smile, now seemed completely alive, driven by a supernatural force that could not be denied. Every movement, every glance, seemed to be a warning. Nothing would make it stop. It was no longer under anyone's control. The atmosphere in the room became unbearable, the air heavy as if saturated with an uncontrollable, malevolent presence. Helena, with her eyes locked on the doll, felt that something deep and sinister was happening, something that couldn't be undone, a line that had been crossed and could no longer be returned from. The house, once a home, was now overtaken by a force that seemed to feed on fear and hopelessness. Something in that doll was alive, something that didn't belong in that place, something beyond human understanding. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would make it stop. The medium, exhausted and pale, managed to get up, his body trembling as if each movement was a superhuman effort. His eyes, once confident and full of determination, were now clouded with worry, and his expression said everything that Helena didn't want to hear. He didn't need to say a word for her to know that something much darker was happening than anyone had imagined. With a hoarse, faltering voice, he finally spoke, his words dragged out as if the very air was against him. The doll. It's possessed. It's not just an object, not a simple superstition. It contains something, someone. Helena felt her heart tighten. She had suspected, but hearing this from someone with so much experience in supernatural phenomena made the reality of her situation even more terrifying. The medium paused, his eyes fixed on the doll that still lay on the floor, as if waiting for the right moment to begin moving again. The tension in the room was unbearable. He continued, his voice now softer, as if merely speaking about the spirit was making him weaker, more vulnerable. It's possessed by a vengeful spirit, a woman who was brutally murdered in a cruel act of violence. Her soul never found rest, and she clung to the doll as a perfect vessel to feed her hatred and her pain. Helena shivered. The image of a woman, her tormented soul trapped in an inanimate object, made her stomach turn. She couldn't fully process what the medium was saying, but the words echoed in her mind, as if they were engraved forever. The doll, which had seemed so innocent at first, was now a manifestation of deep, unresolved suffering, and that suffering was about to consume everything around it. The medium, now visibly shaken, seemed weaker by the second, as if the energy he had invoked was draining his own life force. He moved closer to Helena, his eyes dark and tired, and with a grave, urgent tone he said, "You need to get rid of it, once and for all. The only way to stop this is by burying the doll in a sacred place, a place where this woman's soul can finally rest, where hatred and vengeance can no longer feed. Otherwise, it will continue to manifest, to spread, to bring more curses upon you and everyone around you." Helena felt a wave of despair take over her being. What he was suggesting was not simple. It wasn't a solution she could adopt without thinking. Burying the doll in a sacred place meant confronting something she could barely understand. But what she knew for sure was that she could no longer live in that house. She could no longer be a prisoner of that presence, that force that seemed to grow stronger every day. "Do it immediately," the medium said, with a firmness that contrasted with the visible exhaustion on his face. "If you let this continue, not only the doll, but the spirit inside it, will consume everything, and nothing, not even time, will be able to undo what will be done." Helena looked at the doll one last time. The grotesque smile seemed even bigger, more malicious. She knew her life would never be the same after that moment. Fear still ran through her veins, but something inside her, an inexplicable force, told her that the only way to move forward was to confront it once and for all. She could no longer run. She would have to destroy the evil that had taken possession of her house, her mind, her soul. With one last look at the medium, she nodded, determined. The journey to rid herself of that doll was just beginning. Reluctant, but with no other options, Helena did as she was told. With a heavy soul and a racing heart, she took the doll to a distant cemetery, far from her home, where no one could find it, where the vengeful spirit could finally be banished. She buried it with the utmost care, trying to convince herself that by doing this, she would rid herself of a nightmare, of an evil presence that had consumed her for so long. She walked away, the earth covering the doll as a final barrier between her and the horror that had been chasing her. But even after burying the doll, the feeling that something was wrong did not go away. On the contrary, it seemed that the weight on her shoulders only increased. At first, it was just small details, an uncomfortable feeling, a chill when night fell. But as the days passed, the footsteps in the hallway began again, as if they were closer, heavier. The sound of the muffled laugh, unmistakable and cold, returned, drifting through the wind that came in through the cracks in the window. Helena tried to ignore it, convincing herself that they were just remnants of a mind still marked by terror. But the truth was that fear never left her. It followed her, watched her, like an unrelenting shadow. Then, on a night when everything seemed calmer, quieter than usual, as Helena prepared to sleep, something happened that made her stop dead in her tracks. The sound that broke the silence of the house was unmistakable. A crack breaking the air, the sound of a porcelain doll shattering in the hallway. She froze, eyes wide, heart pounding uncontrollably. The sound was loud and distinct, as if something was shattering right there, just a few feet away. There was no doubt. It was the sound of porcelain breaking, the same cold, shiny porcelain of the doll. Helena knew it wasn't a dream, it wasn't another illusion of her tortured mind. She clearly heard the sound of impact, as if the doll was breaking, shattering right before her eyes, as if it had returned somehow to continue its mission of vengeance. She swallowed hard, feeling a deep chill take over her body. There were no more doubts. The spirit, or the evil that had possessed the doll, had not been banished. No matter where she buried it, no matter what she did, something or someone was still there, waiting, following her. The fear spread through her body, but this time, it wasn't just the fear of the unknown. It was the fear that maybe there was no way out anymore, that whatever was trapped in that doll was now free and nothing could stop it. Helena stood up, her cold feet touching the frozen floor. The sound of porcelain breaking still echoed in her mind, and she knew that tonight the battle was far from over. Something had returned to her, and it was worse than she could ever imagine. The doll, or whatever it was still in her life, and perhaps she would never escape the terror it brought. Little by little, the presence in the house became more oppressive. The air, once calm, now seemed dense, filled with an invisible tension. Helena saw shadows moving on the walls, vague shapes dancing at the periphery of her vision, always when she wasn't looking directly. It was as if something or someone was watching her, waiting for her to make the mistake of looking away for a second. She felt the cold air on her skin, as if the chill was seeping into every corner of the house. even though there was no apparent reason for that constant shiver. She knew, without a doubt, that the doll, in some way, was still there. It couldn't just be a feeling. It was impossible that after everything she had done to rid herself of that curse, the sensation of being watched, of being followed, wasn't real. But where was it? Where was the evil that haunted her if she had buried it in a distant, isolated place, far from her home? Each night, the footsteps in the hallway, the muffled laughter, the darker shadows, all seemed more intense, closer. The feeling of being pursued never left her, as if an invisible hand was gripping her neck, forcing her to face what she couldn't comprehend. It was as if the evil had spread throughout the house, infiltrating the walls, the furniture, the shadows, and she no longer knew what to do to free herself from it. Each night seemed more unbearable than the last. Helena could no longer sleep. When she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the disturbing images that haunted her. The cold eyes of the doll, the grotesque smile, the sensation that something was always relentlessly approaching her. She would wake up in panic, her chest tight, her heart racing, and the darkness around her seemed to stretch and deepen as if she were being swallowed by an endless abyss. Over time, she began to doubt her own sanity. Was it possible that her mind had been so marked by fear and suffering that she was creating those sensations? Maybe it was all a result of her obsession with the doll, the idea that evil was still chasing her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't like that. She knew that what was haunting her wasn't just a creation of her mind, but something much more real and dangerous, something she couldn't understand or control. Helena began to question everything: the house, the doll, even herself. What was left of her life besides fear? Was she simply sinking into an endless paranoia? Or worse yet, was the evil real? And was she lost with no chance of escape? The nights seemed endless, and with each dawn she wondered if she could continue bearing the pressure, the oppression that seemed to be devouring her from within. The terror was no longer something external. It had become a part of her, and Helena didn't know how far it would go before she completely lost control. On a silent early morning, when the world around seemed to fall asleep and the air was thick with the weight of the night, Helena found herself walking down the hallway, consumed by a dark premonition. Something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The silence was almost deafening, a stillness that made every sound, no matter how faint, feel like a thunderclap in her ears. Her footsteps echoed off the walls, and as she passed by the hallway mirror, she glanced at her reflection, not expecting much. But as she did, something cold ran down her spine, and she stopped dead in her tracks. In the mirror, the doll was there. It was back. Not physically, of course. Helena knew she had buried it far from her house, far from her life. But there, in that distorted and heavy reflection, the doll was standing, its macabre smile even wider, grotesque. The doll's face seemed to move, as if being pulled out of the glass, as though the very image was stretching, taking on a new, frightening shape. Every detail of the reflected figure seemed more vivid, more real than anything else around her. Helena felt fear tighten in her chest, but something even more agonizing overtook her in that moment. The doll was no longer in the house. It wasn't physically there anymore, in the real world, but in the reflection. It was as if the mirror had become a window to another place, a place where evil still existed, where she was still being watched. Then an idea occurred to her, an idea so terrifying that it made her body tremble. Perhaps the evil wasn't material. Perhaps it wasn't a matter of burying the doll or getting rid of it in any physical way. Maybe what haunted her was something much deeper and more insidious, something that couldn't be buried or warded off with simple actions. Perhaps the evil was something beyond the physical world, something that hid in the shadows, waiting for her to look in the wrong direction. The fear no longer came just from the doll itself, but from the idea that perhaps it was only a vessel, a means for something much older and more powerful. something that was watching, waiting for the right moment, something that hid in the cracks of the world Helena thought she understood. Perhaps, in that moment, she was being tested by something she couldn't see, something she could only feel when her eyes looked into the mirror. The evil might not be material, but a specter, a presence that didn't care for physical rules, that didn't need the doll to continue its revenge. What if, in fact, what was behind her was something much deeper and indestructible? Something that didn't rely on objects or places. Something that had been waiting for her to realize it, to see what was in front of her eyes, never truly able to escape it. Helena stepped away from the mirror, her heart pounding, and as she did, a shiver ran up her spine. It was as if, at that exact moment, something had moved behind her. An invisible, silent presence, just waiting for her to turn around, for the truth to reveal itself. She dared not look at the mirror again, but she knew that no matter how far she walked away, that reflection would never let her go in peace. Months passed, but the terror Helena experienced in that house never left her. She left everything behind, fleeing to a distant town in search of a new life, a place where she could start over, where the memories of the doll and the evil it carried could be forgotten. But no matter how hard she tried to bury the past, it refused to stay buried. The nightmares continued. At night, when she closed her eyes, Helena was transported back to that dark, suffocating place where the doll's macabre smile watched her, always still, yet with a presence that consumed her. With every nightmare, she would wake up sweating, gasping, with her chest tight, as if the evil were physically there, seeping into her dreams, into her mind. The doll, or the spirit within it, seemed to follow her wherever she went, like a persistent shadow, a mark on her soul that would never fade. Each new house, each new room, seemed to carry a part of what she tried to leave behind. It was as if the essence of that evil was ingrained in the walls, in the air, as though the house itself was an extension of Helena's nightmare. In every corner she felt a presence, a sense that something was watching her, waiting for the right moment to return. Sometimes she would hear footsteps in the hallway, the muffled giggle in the wind, and the chill would return, the reminder of the doll, the evil that never left her. Helena was never the same. Fear had infiltrated her bones, every fiber of her being. She became a shadow of what she once was, a woman marked by something she didn't fully understand, but knew was real. The walls of every house closed in around her, the sensation of claustrophobia consumed her, and she wondered if she would ever be free of that presence. Life, which once seemed full of possibilities, now felt like a drifting existence, where the past and the fear intertwined with the present. The doll, or the spirit that resided within it, had become part of her, like a ghost that refused to leave. And as she tried to rebuild her life, a bitter truth settled in her mind. The evil wouldn't follow her just for a while. It was inside her, and there was no escape. Each new house, each new place only seemed to reinforce the fact that wherever she went, the shadow of the doll would always be there, waiting to return. And so, the doll, buried and forgotten by all, waited in silence. Its porcelain eyes, cold and empty, remained hidden beneath the earth, yet not immune to the passing of time. The spirit that inhabited it, with its thirst for vengeance and its hatred that never found rest, remained still, like a shadow waiting to manifest again. The cemetery where the doll was buried remained quiet, without witnesses, as if the very place were in a state of suspended waiting. But perhaps beneath the cold earth, it was not as forgotten as one might think. Perhaps the doll had never truly been buried. Perhaps its spirit had transcended the earth that covered it, spreading beyond the physical boundaries, seeking a new form of existence. Sometimes the dead do not cling to what they left behind. They seek something greater, something more vast, and the evil that the doll represented might have been infiltrating the very air, waiting for the right moment to take shape once more. And in that eternal silence, while everyone believed it was out of their lives, the doll waited, patiently, for its next victim. It was not just a matter of revenge, but an ancient and relentless force, something that was not limited to a physical body or a specific place. It fed on fear, pain, and the restlessness of those who crossed its path, spreading insidiously. Perhaps the doll was closer than Helena had imagined. Perhaps in some way it was watching, waiting for the next moment, the next distracted glance, the next soul to be consumed. The evil, as she now knew, was not something that could be erased with time. It was not buried in the soil and forgotten. It lurked, silent, waiting. And perhaps by trying to flee, Helena had only postponed the inevitable. Perhaps the doll was waiting for all of us. It didn't matter where we were or how much we tried to hide. Evil knew no bounds, no distance. It only needed an opportunity, a weak point, and with that, it would begin again. Somewhere, at some moment, it would return. And when it did, no one would be safe.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, sharing it with others is a great way to spread valuable insights and keep the conversation going. Don't forget to check out the next video that will appear on the screen. It's packed with more awesome content you won't want to miss.